take two going down, people. Take two of Mindtrap. Let me just bring up your. If the audio is still playing up, then god damn this machine. Right. So give me a full audio check, people. Sound check. What's going down? Because I'm on the brink of yes here, despair, and which is kufr. So I'm about to embrace kufr. Right, so let me check. Somebody saying, "Oh my God, robotic voice." Audio is still rattling, still crap. Oh God, oh my God. You know what? Okay, I'm gonna shift it to the webcam audio, which is such a shame. That is so disheartening. But anyway, let me shift that. Alright, so I've shifted it to this audio. That's just the standard audio, it's nothing special. But at least it shouldn't be rattling. Just get on with it, Mufti. Turn that button off. Okay, which that button? You know how many buttons there are in front of me? There's like so many buttons. Right, so, and God knows why this has been doing that, and it wasn't doing it for Monday nights. This one's a bit clearer. Yeah, but okay, people, let's get this show on the road. Alright, so let me just let me take that off because I can see myself playing back to me, which is confusing as hell. People, let me bring before you the esteemed guest tonight. This picture you're seeing right there, that is our esteemed guest tonight. Look at that, chilling out right there. None other than Jake Brancatella, people. The man, the myth. Let me bring him right before you. The Italian stallion. This is him. Alright. Jake, ahlan wa sahlan, assalamu alaikum, and shukran for coming on Mindtrap with Mufti.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thanks for bringing me on. Finally, we think we cracked the code here.
I think we eventually didn't. I've had to resort to a more a secondary class of a microphone. I don't understand what this is doing. It must be something to do with the number 19, I think.
Yeah, well, I think it was the Quran-only jinn just took over the whole system.
Right, people, those of you that are not familiar with Jake Brancatella, he's from America, born and raised New Jersey, somebody who converted to Islam. He's been on a journey of Islam ever since. Some of that initially took him through the Quran-only movement, and more recently through more mainstream Orthodox Islam, in addition to studying Islamic things at an academic level as well. But Jake, in your words, tell us a bit about yourself.
Right, so I'm from New Jersey. At about 21 years old, I converted to Islam through one of my friends in high school actually introduced me, and I started reading up on the Quran, and basically I converted because I was a lot more comfortable with the theology in the Quran as opposed to the Bible, and for rejecting the Trinity and incarnation and things like that. And initially I was into the Quran only movement, which is a certain sect, if we could call it that, that adheres to following only the Quran in regards to guidance and anything for the deen, as opposed to traditional Sunni Islam, which accepts the Sunnah. So I was into that for about 7 years, and only about a year or so ago, I converted, I guess you can say, to a traditional Sunni Orthodox understanding.
Wow. So really we're talking about almost just a year ago. So very fresh, the whole thing of right. So, okay, so, right. This whole appeal to the Quran-only movement that you had as you converted to Islam, I mean, why the Quran-only Why was that so appealing?
So when I first started reading the Quran, of course, I was totally ignorant about the deen. And just by reading it, I didn't notice pointing to the Sunnah or anything like that. So I started to, in discussions with one of my friends, he kept mentioning things to me. And he would say, well, the Quran says this, the Quran says that. But I would look and I would say, well, man, that's not in there. I don't see that. He said, oh, well, maybe it's in the Hadith. I said, well, what's the Hadith? What is that about? So I looked it up and I started doing some research, and I'm saying, well, I don't know, this doesn't make sense to me. So I said, well, are there any other Muslims out there that believe just like me, only the Quran? And I came across Rashad Khalifa's.
Just to get an idea, how many years ago are we talking at this stage?
We're talking 8 years ago.
8 years ago, okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I started researching. I came across Rashad Khalifa's work online. And then through him, I found Edith Yücel's work.
Okay. And we've had, for our viewers that they know, we've had Professor Edith on the show as well. So, yeah.
Right. Yep. And I've met him and I've been in communication with him for several years now. I would consider him a friend, although right now we have a disagreement and dispute going on with Quran only versus Quran and Sunnah. But I have nothing against him. And yeah, so I came across those works and I was into that for about 7 years, heavily into it. I had my own YouTube channel, which I promoted this sort of Quran-only ideology. And eventually, through doing more research over the past year or so, I felt that there were certain holes in the narrative that I could no longer defend the position. And that's when I eventually became a traditional Sunni Muslim.
I see. Okay. Out of curiosity as well, what was the initial piqued interest in Islam? Was Christianity, a collapse of Christianity? Was that what it was? Or
yeah, well, so I was raised a Roman Catholic, but there were several doctrines in Catholicism that didn't make sense, mainly when you talk about the doctrines related to God, that God is a Trinity, 3 in 1, and the incarnation, that a human being could both be all-knowing and yet ignorant at the same time. This led me to so many contradictions and problems that Islam, to me, with the oneness of God, offered a much more palatable and rational solution.
I see. Okay. Right. So tell us all about this. You've had there's been some, this whole kind of dynamics going on between Dr. Edith, the Quran only. You feel that, look, you've got the arguments to quash the Quranist only, the whole movement. Jake right here is ready in this corner. The Rocky Balboa, the Italian. Jake, for those of you that don't know, your ethnicity is Italian, isn't it? That's what people might be thinking. Why am I saying Italian?
Yeah, exactly. Stallone is practically my cousin. He's my paisan.
All right. Doing it. Right. So.
Yeah. So yeah, I've felt what I have come across devastating arguments against the Quran only position. I might want to say a little bit more about what the Quran only position is before I actually critique it.
Yeah. So
one of the fundamental pillars, if you could say that, regarding the Quran only position, is that they believe that the Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, only received the Quran. Okay, so the only Wahi that he received, or revelation that he received, was only the Quran. And so because of that, they feel that his authority was restricted to the Quran, if that makes sense. Now, the traditional Sunni narrative is that no, look, he did receive the Quran, but he received something else other than the Quran. There was other revelations that he received, and that is part of the Sunnah that we come across. Okay, so the fundamental verse that the Quranists use, or one of them at least, is in the Quran, chapter 6, verse 19. And I'm going to read from Rashad Khalifa's translation what he has, only because the footnote that he puts in his book is relevant and people can look it up for themselves. But he actually has a subheading right before the verse. And it says, the Quran, the whole Quran, and nothing but the Quran. He says, say, whose testimony is the greatest? Say, God's. He is the witness between me and you that this Quran has been inspired to me to preach it to you and whomever it reaches. Indeed, you bear witness that there are other gods besides God. Say, I do not testify as you do. There is only one God, and I disown your idolatry. And then in the footnote, in regard to this verse, he says, this verse proclaims the Quran as the only source of religious guidance. Those who uphold additional sources, such as Hadith and Sunnah, lies attributed to the Prophet, he has in parentheses, are defined as idolaters. So not only is he advocating a different perspective from the traditional narrative, he's saying anyone who upholds another source besides the Quran is a mushrik. And you can find this in Edip Yücel's works as well. And another popular Quran-only person who I studied with for at least 5 years, many years, Hamza Abdul Malik, he also has said similar things. So fundamentally, the idea is that the messenger only received the Quran. Okay, so my goal in this discussion is to prove that that is not the case. And if I prove that he received other revelation apart from the Quran, that would disprove the Quran only position.
Okay, so just to be clear, what you're saying is the Quran only, the Quranists, it's not that they are just saying that we're only going to follow this because we're certain this came to us in Islam, but they're taking a very harsh stance against those people who follow something other than that, seeing it almost as idolatry.
Right, that they're of the mushrikeen and they're bound for hellfire, which is quite, for me, a really radical and bold statement to make. And I mean, where do you see Allah's mercy in this sort of view? Because for people who aren't familiar, the Quranist sect, if we can call it that, is, I mean, I don't know how much you would say, 0.1% of the entire ummah or the world at that. So yeah, you would have the afterlife would look rather grim for most of us. So
yeah, but I mean,
I find that extremely
but would you feel that this is just hyperbole? You know, when people say, so for example, when I did 2 years ago, I did my kind of project called Bukhari Gate with a lot of the issues found in Sahih Bukhari. At that time, I also referred to many current academics in the Arab world who were doing a similar project, and there was somebody, a doctor or an ustad, Rashid Eilal, I believe his name was, but he has something on Bukhari, and I referred to his book in my research as well. But he speaks of Bukhari that this was that this has now almost become the idols of new, the gods of new, and we need to kind of smash these idols. But he's not a Quran-only person, and this is just speech, you know, like whilst people are talking, they're kind of exaggerating a point. And is this not the same thing that Quranists are just doing, or why do you feel it's so literal?
No, it is quite literal, and I'll read from a footnote on this, a commentary which Edip Yücel has in his Quran, on which you had on your show. He has a comment on the same verse. He says, accepting other authorities besides the Quran to define God's system is considered polytheism. And then he lists a bunch of verses, chapter 6, verse 112, and onwards. He lists like 5 verses. So from my experience, and I've had about 7 years in that camp, I know very clearly from them and their prominent figures that they believe that anyone who accepts a religious authority besides the Quran is a mushrik in the harshest sense of the word. And maybe it wasn't so clear with Professor Edip on the last discussion, but I guarantee you that if we had a discussion between the two of us, he would make that abundantly clear. And he in fact goes even further, that not only if anybody else accepts another source besides the Quran, but if you reject his mathematical 19 so-called miracle, you are in the same boat. So that makes the field even more narrow, that simply rejecting 19 makes you a kafir. So on the one hand, and I mentioned this previously, on the one hand, they present themselves as very liberal and open-minded, but on the other hand, when you don't agree with their understanding of what it means to be liberal and open-minded, kind of like the radical left, they drop the hammer down on you and say you're a mushrik and you're going to hell. So that's as clear as it gets.
And you were also willing, I mean, I don't know whether this would happen in the future, but you were willing to take on a debate, enter into a dialogue or a stroke debate with Professor Edip.
Yes, I've been in communication with him since his appearance on your channel and your show. And I mentioned it to him. I'm more than happy to have a discussion with him, or also a former teacher of mine, or one of my companions, Hamza Abdul Malik. I'm opening a friendly challenge to both of these individuals to come on here or any platform that they wish and have a debate or discussion on this topic, because I feel that they cannot answer the problems that I'm presenting.
So, okay, let's kind of zoom out for a moment. Let me present you, because you've been through this whole Quranist journey for many years now, about 6-7 years of your life.
Yeah.
Right. So, let me ask you something now. Just the common questions as a devil's advocate. That look, Hadith have doubt in them. There's many Hadith that are absurd. That I would say, that I have said that Hadith is absurd. There's no way you can, denigrate prophets, the Prophet Moses running around showing people his testicles, and things like this in Sahih Bukhari. These kind of Hadith are absurd and by no means could ever be sound. And if they are sound, then Islam has a problem. If it's either or. Now, how can you have trust in Hadith? This is a common question. So, I mean, as somebody who's been through that journey, what is your response? How can you have trust in Hadith?
Yeah, it's a good question. And
all my questions are good questions.
It's a good question, and I think that's what you were getting at when you asked me before. Is it that these people just have doubt in the idea that the Sunnah was preserved in this vehicle of Hadith, or are they rejecting the concept of Sunnah as a whole? And from my personal experience, they are rejecting the concept of Sunnah as a whole. And I'm getting to your question. But the way that this is known is if you simply ask them, if you were alive at the time of the messenger, peace be upon him, and he said to you something, he gave you a command, and you asked him, is this in the Quran? And he said no. They would say that they would not be obligated to follow his command if it was something outside of the Quran. You see?
So just to clarify, so they would not be obligated to what? To follow the Prophet's commands.
Yes, if it was something that was outside of the Quran.
Are we
Because
saying in his lifetime? Or are we saying after his lifetime? We're saying in his... So the companions around him,
yeah, yeah.
if they ask the Prophet, but it's not in the Quran, they don't need to follow it.
Yes, that's their position. That's what their position is. So it's not only saying that the vehicle that was attempted to be used, the Hadith, to preserve the Sunnah, there's so much doubt in it that we can't accept it. No, their position is even further, that the whole idea and concept of Sunnah in general is an idol besides Allah. And that if they were alive, say me and you were alive at the time of the Prophet, and he gave us a command and it was not in the Quran itself, they feel they would not be obligated to follow what the Prophet said in that case.
That's very fascinating, because I was assuming that this issue is an epistemological epistemological, right? So this was more to do with how do we know the Prophet said this. So because we can't be certain of the medium, therefore we're going to take it. We can't take it. You know, it's doubtful. You see, I'm assuming that, but this is opening a whole new layer of things. This is saying, because, okay, revelation itself.
Yeah, because as I read from that verse in chapter 6:19, they are using that, and in my observation, incorrectly, they are using that verse to say that the messenger, the only thing that was revealed to him that he had that was Wahi from Allah was the Quran, and because of that they're restricting his authority to the Quran only, you see. And so that's why when you mentioned, oh well, how do we know about the Hadith, and you bring up a good point, I just want to kind of move back a couple steps. When I first became Muslim, that's one of the problems.
Take back all the steps you want, Jay. Go for it.
Yeah. So when I first became Muslim, one of the problems that I had was that when I found out about this whole idea of Hadith, I purchased a whole Bukhari and Muslim collection, and I still have them. And I started reading through them, and I said, wow, there's so many things in here that either make no sense or contradict the Quran itself. And I said, wow, if I'm going to get into this stuff, I have to accept all this now, because I was being told by the Sunnis in my area that if you reject even one hadith from Bukhari or Muslim, that you become a kafir or a deviant or some name tag that they're going to apply to you. And I said, well, the hell with it then. I'm throwing the whole baby out with the bathwater. I'm not accepting some of this nonsense. Like in Bukhari, you have a hadith that talks about when the Prophet Musa, I guess it was his time, according to the hadith, that the angel of death came to him, and he turned around and he said, I'm not going anywhere. He punched the angel of death in the face and kind of sent him on his way. And I'm saying, wow, from the perspective that I would think that Musa, as a prophet, would know that, like the Quran says, the angels only do what they're commanded. They cannot commit a sin in that sense. So Musa is going to reject the command of the angel of death, and somehow he's going to overpower him to remain on earth. He didn't want to meet Allah. I mean, this whole thing makes no sense. So I said, if I have to accept these kind of things, well, then I'm just going to reject everything, you see, because I wasn't aware of a possible other solution, which is something that you have presented, which is known, you've termed it as Hadith absolutism. You see, we have what's called the Hadith absolutists, the ones who say that we have to believe in every single Hadith in Bukhari and Muslim, and on the other hand, we have the Quran onlyists who say we have to reject every single Hadith in them. You have presented an alternative, which is what you have described as Hadith relativism, which means we judge each single Hadith on its own merits based on certain principles that you've outlined, and first starting obviously that it can't contradict the Quran. So when I came across this, I said, wow, this is something that I can deal with, that makes more sense. So yeah, I see that these are the three options that we're left with, And my contention is that both extremes of the absolutism, accepting all of them or rejecting all of them, are just as problematic as each other. And it's this middle ground that we have to take in this discussion.
Right, okay. I mean, that... Because, right, this is very... I mean, this is quite... It's very interesting for me because, like I said, I was understanding that this whole thing is to do with epistemology, and it's not to do with the ontological nature of revelation. That can Wahi come from other than Allah? I would say, but that obviously the scholars have discussed this and they have disagreed, but the Maliki madhab is amongst those very clear on saying that the Prophet also legislates. But yes. I suppose they wouldn't take... Do they take scholars as authoritative within the tradition, or not at all? Not at all. Not at all. They reject the whole tradition.
But let me just clarify as a side point. I'm not saying, and as you're saying, that the messenger could be an independent legislator apart from Allah. That's what you're saying. I'm trying to have a more modest claim to show them that what they're saying is incorrect. What I'm saying is that the source of the Wahi is still from Allah, but it is something that is not Quran. And maybe when I give examples of that from the Quran itself, that will make more sense to clearly explain what phenomenon I'm actually describing.
Okay.
So if we take, and we can do that now, if we take a look at chapter 2, verses 143 and 144, in verse 143, it talks about the messenger himself being on a Qibla, okay? And then it mentions that there's a shift from whatever that Qibla was, because it's not clearly defined in that verse, and that's part of the problem that I'm going to present. That whatever that first Qibla was that the messenger was on in verse 143, it shifts to a new Qibla in verse 144, which is clearly identified as al-Masjid al-Haram.
فَوَلُّوا وُجُوهَكُمْ شَطْرَ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ.
Right.
We're talking about, just so people know, we're talking about the shift of the Qibla in Surah Baqarah. Right. This is what we're talking about, yeah?
Right. Yeah, so there was a shift from one Qibla in 143 to a new Qibla in 144, which is Masjid al-Haram. The problem is that in the Quran itself and in that verse of chapter 2, verse 143, there is no description of what that first Qibla actually was. There's nothing in the Quran that actually tells us and clearly tells us what that first Qibla was that the messenger was on. Now, I don't know what your take is on it. I have my own take. But that is really...
Let's have your take. Well, that will be interesting.
Well, here's what I'm going to say.
Go for it.
My answer to what that Qibla was, to make my point, is actually totally irrelevant to my contention against the Quran only. My point to them is that they restrict themselves only to the Quran, and they say, as in 619, that the messenger only received the Quran. Well, the question is, how did the messenger himself know what that first Qibla was in the first verse if it is not clearly explained in the Quran? You see? Because if there was no command in the Quran for him to follow that first Qibla, and it wasn't clearly identified to him what that was, then how in the world did he know what it was? And why was he following something if he himself was to be restricted to only the Quran? My answer to that is that he received revelation apart from the Quran that made that clear to him.
You know, out of curiosity, before we get to that, I just many of our viewers may be thinking as well, you know, the kind of verses like لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ, that you have a great example in the Prophet, or وَمَا آتَاكُمُ الرَّسُولُ فَخُذُوهُ, and what the messenger gives you, then take it. How do all the verses like أَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَأَطِيعُوا الرَّسُولِ, because how do they explain these then? That obey Allah and obey His Messenger? Because if it's just the same thing, then...
Yeah. Well, they have an answer to all of those things. There's that verse... I'm trying to think of what the verse is. There's the verse that says, obey Allah and obey the Messenger and obey the authorities among you.
وَأُولِي الْأَمْرِ مِنْكُمْ.
Right. Now, they say that the scholars, and they use the tradition against the Sunnis in this case, they say that the command to obey is not present in front of the authorities amongst you in that third part of this statement. So they say, based on the tafsirs that you can look at, they say because it's conditional upon the previous two things, that the authorities are obeying. Now, so they take that principle. But
to be fair, that principle is also said by Sunni scholars. Like we say,
I know, that's what I'm saying.
Because the verse says that أطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول وأولي الأمر منكم, and those of authority. فإن اختلفتم, if you disagree, فردوه إلى الله ورسول, then go back to Allah and His Messenger.
Right. And I'm saying that they take that understanding from the Sunnis and they bring it to another verse that says obey Allah and obey the Messenger. Now there's many verses that use both obey in front of Allah and the Messenger, but there are some verses that don't have obey in front of the Messenger. It says obey Allah and the Messenger. So they say, because they take that principle from the other verse and import it to that one and say, therefore obeying the Messenger is conditional upon him obeying Allah. You see? And because they restrict...
So what they're saying is that, so if I've understood correctly, the argument is that when it says Ati'u Allah wa Ati'u Rasul, or Ati'u Allah wa Rasul, let's say, it's saying in essence that obey Allah and the teachings of Allah as expressed by the Prophet, obey that, which is basically just re-emphasizing the first point in obey God. Is this what we're saying?
Right, exactly. It's basically a way of repeating themselves.
Yeah.
Also, another way that they try to explain it is they say, was this command to obey Allah and obey the Messenger? Did Muhammad himself have to obey that command? Now people are thinking,
that's a fascinating philosophical thought. Does the Prophet have to obey the Prophet? Whoa, this session's getting intense. I like this. Let me top up my drink.
So what they would say is, does the Messenger himself have to obey that? Their way is they answer in the affirmative, yes, that he does. Now we're saying, well then, does he just obey himself? No. They say in that case the Messenger refers to Jibril. You see, because it is mentioned in the Quran that Jibril is the one who brings the Quran to the Messenger, and he is
for the Prophet Rasul is Jibril.
Yes, right.
So Ati'ur Rasul for the Prophet is obey Jibril.
Right.
Okay, this is really fascinating.
Because Jibril is mentioned as a messenger in the Quran. That wording is used. So that's their way of getting around it. Now, of course, from our perspective, we don't understand the verse that way. But because of their gymnastics around this verse and other ones, I feel that my approach and the argument that I'm going to present is much more forceful, because it attacks the very thing that is holding their whole Quran-only thing together, and that is that the Messenger only received the Quran and that he did not receive anything else. So,
I mean, by this understanding, and guys, shukran, much love for your support and super chat, Uri, and there was Elijah before as well, shukran. And we will come to later on, we'll take questions as well, but just after this discussion has unfolded. Right, so just to be clear here, that are they saying and many Sunnis say this as well, but I mean, I personally don't adhere to this, but people do say, are they saying that the Sharia itself, these ahkamat, these commandments, they are the ultimate divine thing? Because to say, well, the Prophet can't add to the legislation gives these legislations a whole new level and a whole new aura, because it's saying, well, even the Prophet can't add to them. They're like so, but then each Prophet has had different commandments. So I don't.
Well, yeah, you give this example when you speak about. I think it's in Bukhari Gate. What I want to say now is that there's a different position that is held by some Sunnis that I think is equally as absurd, and I'll explain what that is. That is the idea that because you framed it in Hadith absolutism versus Hadith relativism, I've put it in other terms. I've taken it a step back, and that is Wahi absolutism or Wahi relativism. And what do I mean by that? That's because you have a certain, and I don't know how much of the scholars have said this, but I know that it exists in some tafsirs, is that on, I think it's in chapter 53, verses 2 to 4, it mentions...
I wish my mind worked like that. Like when you said chapter, I would be like... I mean, I am watching that TV series right now called Humans with his synths. They're kind of robots.
Yeah.
But yeah. So what does it say in the verse? And I'll try and figure it out.
Verse, it says that it is nothing but a revelation that is revealed. And they take the it to refer to the messenger's speech. So they say that anything that he said and did was revelation. Right. So they interpret this verse to say they're on the total opposite side of the spectrum. The Quranists are saying the only Wahi that the messenger received was the Quran. These guys are saying, no, he received, not only did he receive the Quran, but every single thing that he said and did was Wahi from Allah.
This is now some dogmatic kind of Sunnis that say this, isn't it? Yes.
Right. And you're aware of this in some of the tafsirs, and some scholars have said this. I'm saying that both positions are equally as absurd. Why? Because when you see that there's several examples, and I started giving the first one in the Quran, that there's things that the messenger could not have known unless Allah told him himself besides the Quran. So there's mentions of, for example, the first Qibla. How did he know what it was? How did he know how to follow it? And so on. Now, with the people who are saying, just likewise, the people who are saying that every single thing that the messenger said and did was Wahi from Allah, it makes no sense in light of certain Quranic ayat and also Hadith even. You have given in the past the Hadith that speaks about when the messenger and the companions were in a particular battle. I think it was the Battle of Badr. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
And they were trying to strategize, look, where are we going to set up camp? And the Prophet came out with some kind of plan. And one of the companions said to him, well, Rasulullah, is this Wahi? Is this revelation? And he said, no. And he said, okay. And then he went on to try to say, look, here's maybe a better way that we can do this, right? So what does that tell you? One thing, it tells you that the companion, and this is using a hadith, but I'm showing it to correct the people who believe in hadith, not the Quranists. It shows you that the companion recognized that there was an authority with the messenger outside of the Quran. Because notice, he didn't say, is this Quran? He said, is this revelation? You see? So he assumed that there could be revelation besides the Quran, but he also rightly assumed that not every single thing was revelation from Allah. You see the distinction? Now we also have likewise in the Quran several times where the Prophet himself was corrected. In chapter 9 verse 43, it is mentioned that the Prophet gave permission to a group of people to remain behind in battle, and it says, it says Allah pardoned you for doing this, and he says, why did you do this when you didn't know who were the truthful from who were the liars? You weren't able to distinguish that. You gave premature permission to people to remain behind in battle when you shouldn't have. So the question is, if and there's several other examples of this, when he frowns and walks away from the blind man, several examples of this in the Quran that people know. If every single thing was wahi from Allah, then why would there be these, we're not saying sins, but these mistakes that the messenger made in the Quran? That wouldn't make sense. That would be like saying, well, Allah, you told me to give permission, then I did, and now you're questioning me about why I gave permission. It would just be totally absurd. Why would he be, being chided for doing something if this was wahi? It wouldn't make any sense. So do you get the angle that I'm coming at here?
No, I do. Out of curiosity, just so we don't miss it out as well, you mentioned your point. You had a different point on the first Qibla. What was that? Just so I know but we'll come back to this. Just as a side note, I didn't want to lose track of that.
I'm still doing research on what exactly the first Qibla was. Maybe you can offer your perspective, but what I think that it is let me just go to the verse, because it sheds some light on it in the second verse. And that's 143 and 144. In the second verse, and I'm just reading out of the English translation because that's what I have in front of me. It says, Qibla is restored to Mecca. It says, we have seen you turning your face about the sky, searching for the right direction. We now assign a Qibla that is pleasing to you. Henceforth, you shall turn your face towards the sacred Masjid. And and this might be a little controversial.
A side note, sorry, not to you, Jake, just the viewers, just to ensure that, you see, for some reason, the Facebook thing seems to have disappeared from in front of me, but I can still see the comments moving. So if you're having any issues, Facebook viewers,
only Jinn taking over.
If the Facebook viewers can't see it or anything, let me know, and what I'll do is I'll have to just refresh the entire thing. But I can see the comments are still moving, but the Facebook page seems to have disappeared here in front of me. So I don't know what's with that. But yeah, carry on. Sorry, Jake.
Yeah. So in that verse, and this may be a little bit controversial from a Sunni perspective.
Sure.
But when you talk about Masjid al-Aqsa is mentioned in the Quran.
Yeah.
And the Shia perspective is that they believe it was somewhere in the heavens, that it was above. Now, this verse, to me, gives me that impression.
Yeah.
Why? Because it says, we have seen you turning your face about the sky. Now we are turning you to a Qibla, al-Masjid al-Haram. So this is my understanding right now, that the messenger his Qibla was towards the sky, and that's what it's referring to. And Allah then positioned him towards the Kaaba. So, like I said, I have to do more research on this.
But just to kind of, when you say towards the sky, you mean what they would pray Salah like they would go like what do we mean, like the Qibla was towards the sky, just to
well, here's the problem, because the traditional narrative, as far as I can tell, is that it was referring to the mosque in Jerusalem. Is that correct? I mean, how do you understand it?
Right. So you're right. I feel that you see, there's two things going on here. There's one, the discussion of what is the Isra wal Mi'raj. Okay, so there's that discussion. And then there's the discussion of the Qibla. Now, I don't necessarily put them, but I keep them separate. Mm-hmm. So to me, the Masjid al-Aqsa, which is being mentioned in the Quran about Allah saying that, we took the Prophet to the Masjid al-Aqsa, the most farthest point of a masjid, of a place of sujood. The other thing is, at that, I don't consider that word masjid to mean masjid like a building. But rather, because at that early stage in Mecca, masjid, the concept of a masjid didn't exist, because there were no masjids. You know,
but even
a place of sujood.
Obviously, even worse, we know that the masjid in Jerusalem didn't exist.
Yeah, exactly, we didn't. So to me, Masjid al-Aqsa is the point of sujood in the farthest part of the vision the Prophet had, which was in the other dimension somewhere. It wasn't talking about this world, and it definitely wasn't talking about Jerusalem. So that's in my understanding, that Jerusalem was not at all. But put that on one side, the discussion of the Qibla, I feel that it's related. Okay, I see.
In the sense that in this verse, when it's mentioning the Qibla that he was originally on, it's telling him to now turn towards Masjid al-Haram. And like I said, I have to do more research on it.
Yeah.
But I know that first Qibla could not have been Jerusalem, because that masjid was not there. And even as you're saying, the concept of a physical masjid in that sense was not present at that time. See? So it can't be that.
And it's not even just it's not just a physical masjid. The institution of a masjid did not exist. So when Allah is saying Masjid al-Haram, al-Haram at that time was a pagan territory. It was not a masjid. And it was just, what it means is a sacred spot where people kind of devote themselves in worship. So it's not just the building, but it's also the concept of a masjid. When we think of a mosque today, we think of a building in which we offer 5 prayers, in which this concept did not exist as a masjid.
Right. Yeah, but I would say that there is a verse. What is it? It's in chapter 22 somewhere, I think. I don't have that one off the top of my head, but there is a verse that in English it says that if Allah were not to check some people by other people, these people would have destroyed churches.
وَلَوْلَا دَفْعُ اللَّهِ النَّاسَ بَعْضَهُمْ بِبَعْضٍ فَسَدَتِ الصَّوَامِعُ, and all these monasteries and churches and these would have been destroyed.
The word masjid, I believe, is used in that verse. So that tells us that in the one sense I'm agreeing with you, but on the other hand, this verse is giving the indication that no, masjid is being put in the same category as these physical buildings that people went to go and worship at. You see what I'm saying?
No, you're actually right. That's a good point. That's actually a very good point. What I would say to that is, in that sense, masjid, you're right. But it would not be. It doesn't necessarily go against my point, because it wouldn't mean masjid in the institutionalized sense of masjid today. It would mean like the word in English, like temple.
Yeah. Well,
like if we said a place that people consider sacred, and where they would kind of, they would devote their kind of worship or whatever it is to God, just all gods or pagans, because Masjid al-Haram was a pagan site. So even though it is called Masjid al-Haram in the Quran at that time, but it was not referring to a masjid as we understand masjids later on.
It was more of, like you said, a place of sujood. And even the word sujood itself in the Quran, it mentions that everything that exists makes sujood to Allah. It says that the birds do, everything does. So we know, and that even the shadows. So we know that the word can have a more.
But somebody might say, with all this stuff, but what are you trying to prove with all of this, with the Masjid al-Haram?
Let's just. We don't want to get too bogged down.
People would say, what's the point with all this?
Yeah, the point is that. The question for and see, I'm a philosopher, which we didn't.
You didn't introduce yourself as You should have introduced yourself. Let's reintroduce Jake.
We didn't introduce me properly as a philosopher. I studied logic in university. And see, the way that I construct all of my arguments, I try to format them into deductive arguments. Why? Because they're much clearer and easier for people to understand. So this is my argument based on what we're just talking about with this Qibla. It would go like this. Premise 1. If the messenger received Wahi apart from the Quran, then the Quran only position is false. Premise 2. The messenger did receive Wahi apart from the Quran, therefore the Quran only position is false. Now, I obviously need to provide evidence to prove that. First of all, why would the Quran only position be false if the messenger received Wahi apart from the Quran? It would be because, as I clearly quoted for them, that's what their whole foundation is built on, that the messenger only received the Quran. So if I can prove
couldn't they say that the Prophet received some kinds of revelation that were not verses of the Quran?
Yes, but if they said that, they would have to reject their fundamental principle for which it's built on. Then the conversation would shift rather from an ontological perspective of rejection to an epistemological, where then they would have to say, yes, he did receive these other things, but we can't trust the vehicle. And now that shifts to a different conversation now. See, I'm attacking the ontological grounds that they're standing on first.
I see. No, go for it. Attack away, Italian stallion. So you're saying,
So I'm saying that if I prove he received something else besides the Quran, now they have to get away from hiding behind this ontological argument, and then we could have a discussion about the reliability of the Sunnah being transmitted to us. I feel that that's a secondary issue, because what's really at stake is the first part. And so what I'm trying to show with chapter 2 verse 143 is not that, I'm Jake, I'm a genius, I know.
All right, Jake the genius.
I know what this Qibla is necessarily, and this is what it is, and I have all the proof. No, it's not about that. It's putting the question to them to say, if the messenger only received the Quran, then how did he know what the Qibla was? Because in that verse itself and in the entire Quran, nowhere does it explain.
Just to be clear for our viewers, because some of them have asked in the question, Jake is a Sunni. He is a mainstream Muslim coming from the Sunni position. This is, although he spent many years as a Quranist only, I think some people are getting confused. They're thinking you're trying to argue the Quranist position. You're actually trying to debunk. He's trying to debunk the Quranist position. So, sorry for interrupting you. Carry on.
Yeah. So, as I was saying, if the messenger only received the Quran, then the question comes, where was the command in the Quran itself for him to follow that first Qibla? Forget about what the Qibla was. Where was he told to follow that first Qibla? And how in the world did he know what it was if there's no identification of it in the entire Quran?
What if they say that the Qibla was just arbitrary?
There's a good point. Yes.
See, people, I'm always making good points.
I've thought of that, Mufti. I anticipated this. And if people
you set me up.
So I'm just going to give myself a quick plug here.
I
have my own YouTube channel, which is called the Criterion, in which
I'll include a link in the description afterwards as well.
Inshallah. So I have my own channel, the Criterion. I haven't been active for some time, maybe 6 months or so. But my video that I put out when I made the switch to becoming a traditional Sunni was on this very topic, and it's headlined, "Did the Messenger only receive the Quran?" or something like that. And in that video, I explained the various possibilities of how somebody could answer this question, and one of them is one that you mentioned, and I debunk all of them. It's about a 30-minute video. So people can go there and check it out, but I'll do the best I can here. The point is that another thing you have to realize about the Quran only people is they make a distinction between the messenger and the prophet. They say that obedience to the messenger is necessary, but not the prophet, because the prophet refers to him in his human capacity. When he's a messenger, he's completely perfect. And that's why
they flip that, don't they? Because normal Sunnis tend to say, not that this is a doctrinal issue, but just I've commonly seen scholars say Rasul is the messenger, Nabi is the prophet. But they, Professor Edip, when he was on the show, said, no, we see it the other way around. We would say Nabi is the messenger and Rasul is a prophet.
No, they would use those terms, but they would refer to them in the opposite sense.
Okay.
In other words, the messenger is restricted to the Quran. The prophet is not, and they give examples in the Quran where the prophet is corrected, like in chapter 66, verse 1. It says, "O prophet, why did you make haram what Allah has made halal for you?" You see? So they say that every time he's corrected, he's always corrected with a Nabi, not Rasul. So they make that distinction. Now, when you say that it could have been arbitrary, this goes against their point that the messenger is perfect. Why? Because in chapter 2, verse 143, the verse that I read, it calls him the messenger, I believe, let's see, two times. I'm seeing that it calls him the messenger. So if it was completely arbitrary, then why did Allah call him the messenger? Because they're saying that him in his capacity as a messenger was restricted to the Quran. Not only that, Allah supports the fact of this Qibla. Let me just read the verse. He supports it. He says that he's the one who established it. Allah himself established this Qibla, and it was not arbitrary.
Okay.
It says, we, Allah, thus made you an impartial community, that you may serve as witnesses among the people, and the messenger serves as a witness amongst you. We changed the direction of your original Qibla only to distinguish those among you who readily follow the messenger from those who turn back on their heels. It was a difficult test, but not for those who are guided by God. So, in fact, Allah is saying that He is the one who made that Qibla, and He says that He made the Qibla, the switch in the change of the Qibla, as a test to see who was going to follow the Rasul from one Qibla to the next. So this is not arbitrary. This is a plan by Allah himself, and he tells you what his purpose was in doing this. So that's not going to fly in this case.
Okay. Right. You see, okay, I see your point, because even the Sunni tradition is not too, it's not too clear on what was the Qibla before the Qibla became the Kaaba. I mean, they understand it was, because some descriptions say it was the Kaaba already. Some say the Prophet made, like the Hadith in Bukhari is a bit confusing. It says that the Prophet, it seems to allude that it made made the Kaaba first, then Jerusalem, then the Kaaba, then Jerusalem or something. There seems to be a lot of shifts. Some suggest that what the Prophet used to do was he would point to Jerusalem, but he would have the Kaaba in the middle. So he would stand, like if this direction was Jerusalem, so the Prophet would stand with the Kaaba in front of him in that direction, that Jerusalem would be behind the Kaaba. So that's one of the kind of the understandings the Sunni scholars have from Sahih Bukhari.
Yeah. But let's just say that was true. Is that in the Quran?
No, it's not.
No, of course it's not. So the question is, then you're back to saying either the messenger himself did this arbitrarily, which from my perspective would be wrong for him to do that, or was he instructed to do this by Allah himself? Now the verse.
Why do you feel, out of curiosity, that it would be wrong?
it would be, well, not only would it be wrong, it doesn't go in line with the verse, because the verse suggests that Allah himself made this Qibla, and he says that we switched from one to the other to distinguish who was going to be following. So are we saying that the messenger was totally unaware of this plan until the verse came down? I mean...
Okay, but one would assume that these verses about سَيَقُولُ السُّفَهَاءُ that, you know, ma wallakum, what turned you away from your qibla, the foolish people will say, as the Quran suggests. But this was happening in Medina. The 13 years prior to that in Mecca, that wasn't really an issue. So
yeah, but those verses that are saying what has turned you away from your qibla, now what was that qibla that they're talking about then? You see what I'm saying? Now I can go on to give other examples.
Sure.
But what I'm saying is that you have two options right now. You either have to say that it was arbitrary and that the messenger just made this up, which doesn't seem to be in line with what the verse is saying. Because Allah is saying that he made the Qibla and then says what his purpose was for switching from one to the other. So I don't see how that could be a proper test if the messenger just arbitrarily came up with this. Because then why would they be obligated to follow that? I mean, it doesn't seem to add up.
Okay, so I mean, in addition to the Qibla,
yeah,
are there any other points that you feel are solid cases against this, or is the Qibla the main one?
No, that's one of them.
Okay.
But another one is, and first, actually, we can stick on the Qibla for a second with al-Masjid al-Haram.
Okay.
Let's transition from the first Qibla to the second one, al-Masjid al-Haram.
Okay.
Does the Quran itself clearly identify what al-Masjid al-Haram is? If you stuck to a Quran-only perspective, what would you say?
Does it specify what is al-Masjid al-Haram?
Yeah.
I mean, as in, is Masjid al-Haram the Kaaba? Is this the question? Just to be clear, just so I understand the question.
But then the question would be, if Masjid al-Haram is the Kaaba, which it is, there's a verse that says that. I think it's in chapter 5, verse 92. The question would be, what is the Kaaba?
Because generally, you're right, the Quran by its very nature, although it addresses matters, but they seem to be kind of...
assumed.
They seem to be almost atemporal and spatial almost. Like you could just take this verse and fit it somewhere totally. Hence the Petra question, which people have kind of taken, the Mecca question. They've managed to take the verses of the Masjid al-Haram, the Qibla, and just fit them in Petra. So
because there's no verse in the entire Quran that makes clear what the location of Masjid al-Haram is.
Yeah, I'm just bringing them up here as well. So yeah.
I mean, I've done what we would call in the Quran only community a tasrif, which is you take the word, a certain word in the Quran, and you look at all the times that it's used.
Okay, so just to be clear, the verse that you were speaking about, okay, I see. So in Surah Baqarah, the verse, I just want to bring it up because I know we're referring to it quite a bit, that where it says وَمَا جَعَلْنَا الْقِبْلَةَ الَّتِي كُنْتَ عَلَيْهَا إِلَّا لِنَعْلَمَ مَنْ يَتَّبِعَ الرَّسُولَ مِمَّنْ يَنْقَلِبُ عَلَىٰ عَقِبَيْهِ. So we did not make the Qibla which you were upon, except that we can use it to know who will follow the Prophet from who will turn away on their heels.
Right. So does that sound arbitrary?
Okay, I see. Right, I see your point. Does that, you see, that verse doesn't sound. That sounds like it's being done as a test, as a kind of.
Right.
But that said, it could leave space for saying, well, you see, because my understanding of the Qibla issue is that the Prophet was originally pointing towards the Kaaba in Mecca, because that was the holy sanctuary. So that is where he would pray. However, I do feel in the early Meccan period, the Prophet ﷺ started to align himself in line with Judeo-Christian traditions, to kind of demarcate between the Abrahamic people and the other. The other became the pagans of Mecca. And to create this otherness, he aligned himself with, so he started to kind of, even his hairstyle, it mentions in the Sunnah books that he started to comb his hair like the people, like the Jewish people. He started to almost modify his style, his dress. He started to, so I would feel at this stage, him also pointing to Jerusalem, but I can buy the fact that it was done in a way where he was still pointing at the Kaaba, but from the angle that Jerusalem was in that direction behind it, was just to align himself more with the Jewish people.
But would you feel that, let's just say for the sake of argument that what you've just explained is correct, how it actually historically happened, would you feel that that was something arbitrary that the messenger did, or that this was a part of a plan, as the verse to me suggests, that Allah had this in mind when he was doing this?
You see, the way I understand things is that there is a kind of a legislative license, and that is granted to the Prophet. But that said, Mecca was a period where it was pretty much a blank canvas. You know, there were no ahkam of Sharia. There was no, there was no, for the most part, there was no mandatory salah. There was no, so these things, I feel that there was a lot of creative license there that the Prophet could have.
Yes, but I'm saying that works under your paradigm. But put your Quran only hat on. Think about it from their perspective. You cannot say that because
that license thing doesn't work with how you explained.
That doesn't work with them. So for them to say it's arbitrary is problematic from their own perspective. Do you see what I mean? Because they don't.
Somebody could ask here that what about more simpler things like saying how you pray salah and stuff like this? Are these not?
Well, I'm going to get
questions.
We'll get to that eventually,
Oh,
inshallah. But the point is, let's say it was arbitrary. Let's say the messenger came up with this because he wanted to connect ties with the Jews and so on. Let's say this was the case. Could the Quran onlyists accept that framework? No, they couldn't. Why?
They can't.
Because they are restricting. They're saying we only follow the Quran. Why? Because the messenger only followed the Quran. So this narrative is not consistent with that, because you're saying that he arbitrarily came up with this, or maybe not completely arbitrary. It was by some wisdom that he wanted to connect ties with the Jews. But anyway, that's not in the Quran. It's not a strict following of the Quran itself. So either way you take it, the whole point is that whatever he did in following that first Qibla, it's not mentioned in the Quran. So either it was from Allah or it was arbitrary from himself, but either route you take, it's a problem from their perspective.
Do you feel, though, worldwide, I don't know if you know, if this is something you've been familiar with.
Come on, Mufti, you know I'm worldwide. You know.
All right, Mr. Worldwide. It's all about that Dale lifestyle.
Yeah, man.
Right, so... But do you feel the Quran movement is like this worldwide? Or I would have felt that the people, maybe the majority of people who incline to Quranist only, they're just caught up on an epistemological angle of trying to say, we can't prove Hadith, so, chuck them away.
No, not at all. What they actually will do, they might hide it under the guise of an epistemological problem, but really the problem is the ontology. And the only way you can really see this is you get a Quran-only person. You say, listen, if you were in front of the Prophet himself and he gave you a command and it wasn't from the Quran, you asked him, just as that companion did when they were setting up, and he said, is this revelation? And he said, no. Would you then or this was the Quran in their case, would you accept his command? They will tell you no. I know firsthand from Edip Yüksel and from Hamza Abdul Malik, who I studied with for like 5 years, that their position is not. Their position is I'll give you another verse, maybe make it clearer. In chapter 6, verse 106, let's see. It says, "Follow what is revealed to you from your Lord. There is no God except He, and disregard the idol worshippers." They link this verse to the previous one that I mentioned, 6:19, and they say there's two things. Follow what is revealed to you from your Lord. Question is, what is revealed to you from your Lord? They use 6:19 to restrict that and say only the Quran was revealed to the messenger. There is no God except He, and disregard the mushrikeen. So they say if you don't fall in line with those two commandments as they understand it, you are of the mushrikeen.
Yeah.
And I can read a quote here.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, go for it.
I have a quote here from Hamza Abdul Malik himself, where he has a video on YouTube called Source of Guidance. They frequently talk about what is the source of guidance. Their source of guidance is the Quran, not the messenger. The messenger is only the mailman or the vehicle that presents what
this is really kind of revelatory to me. I although now that you say it,
wait, are you receiving Wahi right
I
now?
know, what the hell is going on? We're gonna have a new movement all of a sudden.
Oh my God!
Because I definitely, now that you say this, I do see this in the way people speak about the Prophet, certain academics and things like this. But to me, that kind of an Islam, obviously, it's qualitatively different, because to me, the Sharia is not. You see, what I have argued. In fact, I've got a video called the Sharia, the Kintsugi hypothesis, in which I argue that the Sharia itself is not sacred in Islam. It's only the vehicle in which it's come, because it's been revealed via the Quran, that is holy and sacred. But the rulings per se are just, they just reflect the norms of that society. They weren't something which, so when it mentions, cut the hand of the thief, this was just something the Arabs were doing anyway. It wasn't something which came as this was since time immemorial. God had this planned, that when 7th century comes, I want you to start chopping hands. It doesn't. So to me, the Sharia is, and I give the Kintsugi hypothesis of the Japanese art, where they take broken pottery, but they majestically bring it together with a kind of golden a weaving of to fix it. And what the Sharia is doing is taking a broken human society, but kind of fixing it. So it is it is a social solution. It is our solutions to problems that we have, to our own problems. It's not. So in that sense, this tool of doing that is then inherited through the Sharia by its scholars to do the same. So I suppose my my understanding of Islam obviously is oceans apart from that understanding, and saying no, that whatever just came. But then, I want to ask a question. Are they saying...
Go ahead, Mufti.
Yes, enlighten us, man. Jake, teach us, man. So, do they say things like like chopping the hand off the thief is still equally valid today?
Oh, man, yeah. So, they are very literalistic in interpreting the Quran. And this is another problem, we could talk about. But since they only have recourse to the Quran, they really don't have any usul or principles or a clear system for how they interpret the Quranic text. You see, because we have these things through the tradition. You see, they don't have any. I mean, if they don't have a recourse to things outside of the Quran, how do they even understand the Arabic in the Quran itself? How do they know, for example, certain words that are only mentioned one time in the Quran? Because they'll say things like this, like when you had Edip on. He told you when you talked about the hitting verse, right? And he said the word daraba is used many different ways in the Quran, which is true. So you have a wide range where you can look at it and then based on the context interpret it a certain way. But what about the words Arabic words that are only used one time in the Quran? How do you know what they mean? You don't have another verse.
You see, the hitting verse. Not the hitting verse, the chopping off the hands verse. He interprets that, if I recall correctly, because I did look at read his the introduction in his Quran tafsir, and it mentions errors in translation.
Cutting off the well.
So the means, to prevent the means of, so not to cut the physical hand, but this is allegorical usage of the language.
Yeah, but you know why that's bogus? I'm gonna show you. Here.
If Professor Edip is watching this, then Jake, you better watch out, Jake.
Yeah, man. So the hitting verse is in chapter 5.
Yep, 35, isn't it?
Chapter 5, verse 38.
35.
It says, and I'm 35? reading from Professor Edip's translation, just giving him a shout out.
All right.
Because I'm going to show you what happens here. In chapter 5, verse 38, he says, penalty for the thieves. The male thief and the female thief, you shall mark, cut, or cut off their hands, /means as a punishment for their crime, and to serve as a deterrent from God. God is noble, wise. So notice that he puts hands and he puts a dash, means, in the translation. Now look at this. If you want to go by their principle of looking at how a word is used in the Quran, why not just go 5 verses before that, Mufti? In chapter 5,
let's do it. 5 verses before.
in chapter 5, verse 33, he has a different subheading. What does it say? Live by the sword, die by the sword. Now, what does this verse say?
What verse is that? I'm sure that's the Bible, not the Quran.
It actually, here, you'll see. It says, the recompense for those who fight God and his messenger and seek to corrupt the land is that they will be killed, or crucified, or that their hands and feet be cut off on alternative sides. And then he puts, or that they be banished from the land. That is a disgrace from them in this world. In the hereafter, they will have a great retribution. So this is in the context of now, when 5 verses later, the punishment for the thief comes up. And this can clearly not be interpreted in the way that he said.
What's the interpretation for lashing? Let's get the other folk involved with their keen interests. What's lashing?
Honest, you mean?
Yeah, but I mean in the same translation for Surah Nur, for lash the fornicator. What do they translate? Is that literal? They say lashing, or they say?
Yeah, they would say it's a literal lashing, but that they reject the idea of stoning, of course.
But would they today say we should still lash people?
I think so, yes.
Okay, that would be interesting to know.
Yeah.
All right.
My point with this verse is that you can't interpret it in the way that he interpreted it 5 verses later. Why? Because the context is clear. It says killed, crucified, or that their hands
That's a very good point, I have to say.
Be cut off on alternative sides. So now I'm saying, why are you translating it this way? 5 verses later, the word is used in the exact same way in the Arabic, and now you want to translate it as something else. This is inconsistent.
Jake, what's this thing about the number 19, man? This is on everybody's mind here. Did you see any mystery in the number 19? Did you see the sign of the divine, or what's going on? Or did you just see it as an...
I did, but then I realized I was dreaming and I woke up.
You did, but then you thought, damn, I need to take those mushrooms again.
Yeah, but then I ran out of money, so I couldn't buy it. But now this business of the 19, again, with no disrespect to Professor Edip.
Yeah, this is no disrespect. This is just academically taking things apart.
Yeah, I'd be happy to discuss that with him. And I have his book here.
Yeah.
19.
Whoa.
God's signature in nature and scripture. So I've read this whole 500 or whatever page.
Wow, you read that?
Yeah.
Damn, man, Jake, you're doing it, man. I struggle to read books like that.
You think that you were going to deal with a Jersey boy and he wasn't going to come prepared? I mean, come on now.
Jake is killing it with the academia, people. This is it.
I'm coming through heavy, man.
All right, you're doing it. Talk to us about 19, man. Apart from it.
This 19 stuff.
Is that the age of the Huris in Jannah? Are we gonna have 19-year-old Huriyat in Jannah? Tell us what's. Don't break our heart now.
Oh man, yeah. So this 19 stuff, as Professor Edip explained, was supposedly discovered by Rashad Khalifa in 1974.
Yeah, he did say that. Yeah.
I'm just gonna try to keep this as simple as possible.
Go for it, man.
When we talk,
so 19-year-olds can understand what you're saying, basically. Let's aim for that intellect.
So Edip Yüksel actually mentioned briefly in your discussion that they reject chapter 9, verses 128 and 29, the final two verses of Surah 9.
Surah Tawbah. Yeah, he did say that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and get this. Look at the hypocrisy. I'm sorry to say now. Their justification for rejecting these verses is first, why? Because they say that these two verses were the only two verses that had one witness for them in the entire Quran.
But isn't that taught to us through some hadith? Which are problematic hadith.
There you go, Mufti. I knew I was on the right show. Did
you just know? People.
Oh man, we're what's the time? We're starting to think alike. It's getting
all right, man. It's sinking. It's sinking.
So this is clear hypocrisy. You're using a hadith to justify rejecting a verse in the Quran, when in fact you've been trying to tell us all along it's the opposite. We should be using the Quran to reject hadith. I mean, it's just absurd. The second thing that they try to do is they say that because the messenger is called Rahim in one of these verses, this is an attribute that is to be for God alone.
God only. Yeah, I found that part very confusing, actually, because in my dialogue with Professor Edip, he said that, look, this attribute is exclusive to God. But obviously the purpose of my show is not to start arguing with people. It's to allow people to... Of course. we wouldn't have much to argue over anyway. I mean, those that don't know, Jake is a Maliki as well. He's rocking that as well.
You know it.
So, but I want to kind of, especially where people have very different ideas, I want them to express their ideas. But when he said about Rahim is restricted for God, but then I was going to say that, look, but what about things like Kareem, which is, or Aziz, like Aziz of Misr, when in the Quran that he says, or when sarcastically, when Allah is saying in the Quran, Zuk, innaka anta al-azizul kareem, take this punishment, ain't you the azizul kareem? And but I did find that a very weak point to say nobody could be called compassionate or generous or whatever just because God is known as generous. But yeah, what is your comeback on this, Jake? What's your what was the killer move that the wrestler Jake the Snake used to have back in the days? It was the DDT. He used to go and drop down. What's your DDT on this, man?
Yeah. So first, I said that their justification by using Hadith is complete hypocrisy. Mm-hmm. Secondly, with this Rahim business, is in chapter 48, verse 29, and I'm reading from. Am I reading? No. Let me bring up Edip Yüksel's translation. I don't want him to feel like I'm leaving him out here. You know, if I'm gonna refute him, I might as well do it with himself, right? I mean,
this is not, by the way, a refutation of Professor Edip. We're not. That's not the purpose of this, but
it's just going down.
It just route, seems to be.
Yeah. So no, in honesty, I'm using his translation because we're talking about 19.
You know him personally, don't you?
Yeah, I know him personally. I talked to him about a week ago on the phone.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, okay, that's.
Call me after you see this.
All right.
So, in chapter 48, verse 29, in his translation, he says, Muhammad, the messenger of God, and those who are with him are severe against the ingrates, but merciful between themselves. Mm-hmm. So now the same word, merciful, is not only being applied to the messenger, it's being applied to the collective, the companions as well. Because
that's a very good point, actually.
Those who are with him are severe against the ingrates, but merciful between themselves. So now we have to say, I'm sorry, Brother Edith, you got to go here and look. It's amazing. It's the last verse in the surah.
There were also
so maybe he should go.
Words like there were also words like ulama in the Quran. إنما يخشى الله من عباد العلماء, which is plural of alim. Yeah. But unless they are to say that ulama is not that, unless the only argument I'm thinking might be to say that this plural for ala is not from fa'il, it's from fa'il. Or something else, which isn't it isn't the systematic grammatical thing we're taught in Arabic grammar, but I'm just saying that might be.
And it's not with this. In this case, in chapter 9, whatever it was, verse 128, it's saying that the messenger is merciful to the believers. Yeah. In this one, it's repeating the same thing, but now it's including the others and saying they are merciful.
No, to be fair, this is a very weak argument. Anyway, this argument that that we can't have any kind of adjectives of compassion or things like this.
Right.
I feel that anybody that you present that argument to won't really buy it anyway. It's a very weak argument, I feel.
Of course, but I just want to use the verse.
Yeah, but that was good thinking though, because the verses that came to my mind were like ulama and so on, but I didn't think of this verse, and that is, you're doing it, man. You're on point. You're kind of like you've got. That verse didn't come to my mind.
I gotta use the word that they're actually using to put a more emphasis on. Likewise, and I don't.
Is there anything on this 19 because that's a really big thing that they've got? Yeah. Is there anything from the top of your head coming straight about 19 that you're like, say hello to my little friend?
Well, listen to this.
You're gonna go Tony Montana.
Listen to this. Get this.
Yeah.
They say, and let me read for you why I'm bringing up these two verses. Because this is Rashad Khalifa's translation. You see, guys, I'm trying to be academic and read straight out of the book here for you guys.
Wow, this is it.
Let me read for you what Rashad Khalifa said about the importance of rejecting these two verses. Look what he says. In the footnote notes, he doesn't even include these verses in the translation. He puts a footnote and puts 128 and 129. He said, it demonstrates one of the functions of God's mathematical code in the Quran, namely to guard the Quran against any alteration. It provides additional miraculous features of the Quran's code. Due to their extraordinary importance, the details are given in appendices 24 and 29. Now, quote, watch this. He says, one immediate observation is that the number of occurrences of the word God at the end of Surah 9 is 1273, 19 times 67. But if you included this verse, Allah's name is mentioned one time there, it would throw off the count. So here's what he says.
Okay.
If, this is conditional, if the two false verses, 128 and 129, are included, this phenomenon and many more will vanish. So they have to, from the discoverer himself admits that if we include these two verses, the entire system of 19 is thrown out of the water. You see, it becomes, because now the very mention of Allah's name is not a multiple of 19.
Yeah. I mean, I did. To be fair, I had heard that the reason they rejected those verses, I had read that it wasn't actually to do with Rahim being mentioned. It was more to do with the calculations wouldn't then come out for 19.
Yes, but they couldn't use that as a justification because that would be a circular argument.
Yeah, exactly.
So they try to use Hadith, and then they try to use Rahim, which is just bogus. I mean, it's nonsense. But anyway, leaving that aside, the concept of 19 in general is completely arbitrary. Why do I say that? First of all, if you study mathematics, you will understand, anybody knows a basic fraction. You have a numerator and a denominator. If somebody who's a skeptic and they're saying, hey, Rashad or Edith, tell me about this 19, somebody's going to want to know, what are the total possible scenarios in which 19 could be applied in the Quran? And then how many times does it actually occur in the Quran? And then look at that probability and say, wow, that's like 65%. That is way above just making it by chance.
Okay, now this is very interesting what you're saying now. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
However, we don't have that. If you ask Edip Yüksel that question, he cannot answer. Why? Because he doesn't actually have a set criteria for looking at how we determine whether or not something comes to 19, whether or not it's even worthy of our investigation. He cherry picks things like 19, Rahim, different attributes. Why not this other attribute of God? Why not this other word usage in the Quran? So the whole thing is
why not the number 40, for example? That's mentioned in the Quran as well.
Right.
40.
But even if you take the number 19, why are we only looking at and for example, even with the word Allah, it's interesting that they include Allah and they include certain other derivatives of Allah's name, but they do not include Allahumma. When it comes to Allahumma, they do not include those, and it's mentioned, I believe, 2 or 4 times, something like that. But whatever it is, it throws off the count. But yet there's other derivatives of Allah's name that they do include. So what's the justification for including this set but not Allahumma? And they have no answer. It's all just number games that they're playing. And you will begin to see this more and more when you study. For example, in Edip Yüksel's 19 book, he shows many different ways.
You've come fully prepared, Jake. This is like all guns blazing here.
He brings up many different ways that you can arrive at 19. For example, he simply takes the number of surahs, 114 divided by 19. It's a multiple of 19. He takes certain words and says you divide it by 19 and it comes out. How does that happen with a prime number? It's miraculous.
You see, to be fair, I've said to my opinion on this has been, and I said it to Professor Edip and I've said to other people, is that there may be, I feel, that there may be some kind of some mystery about the number 19 in the cosmos, that from a mathematic perspective there may be, and we may have, within our subconsciously, that these things resonate, not just the number 19, other numbers as well. There may be, and therefore it manifests itself through our words, through our expression. It may be like in poetry. Why did in English, for example, they select the pentameter? Why the 5? What is it like? Heavy lies the head that wears the crown. That why in that pattern? Why in Arabic have they got these buhur on these particular numbers? Mufa'alatun, mufa'alatun, mufa'alatun. Why like that? It may be because we do, as human beings, resonate with certain patterns which ultimately can be reduced to numbers, but that may just be a result of our evolutionary past, or it may be a result. There may be other things. I was not trying to throw the number 19 out of the window altogether, but I was just saying that the way it's being presented is just like, it just seems like this is way too much. Like, if you divide this by 19, if you add 1 here, if you list all the surahs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 114, and each one you add this by 19 and you divide it by 19. And I'm thinking, look, come on, this is this is just way too much for normal people to appreciate.
Well, my main contention is that there's no consistent methodology for deriving 19. For example, I have here on page 158 of his book, he lists that Allah is mentioned is 2,698 times. That's 19 times 142. He mentions that Rahman is mentioned 57 times. That's 19 times 3. Rahim is mentioned 19 times 6. That's 114. That's great, but why not the other attributes? What is special about certain attributes rather than others? Why do you just take, you show that, Rahim is mentioned in a derivative of 19, but why not
Alim or Basir or
right,
Qawi
all these other attributes? What is...
I get it.
There's no consistent methodology.
Definitely, I definitely agree with you. Jake, shall we take some questions? People are... guys, if you've got some questions, I know quite a few have been throwing up questions all the way through in the chats, but they may have scrolled quite a bit up. So if you've got some questions, I'll present them to our esteemed guest tonight, the Honourable Jake. I wonder how you write that in Arabic, by the way. Have you tried to Arabicize it or something? Have you gone Jaq?
Well, hey. A lot of people, including certain family members, can't even pronounce my name correctly.
Seriously?
It
can't be difficult for Arabic speaking.
Because my family, my dad's side is from Italy. His parents are straight off the boat from Italy.
All right, so, bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao.
They say, how's it, Jack? How's it, Jack? They can't say Jake, they say Jack, and I feel that happens with Arabic speaking people as well. So don't feel bad, Mufti.
Don't worry. No, I think it's an awesome name, man. Jake, you're doing it. So all right, people, let's take some questions. Somebody had asked here that what about Sam Gerrans' Quran-centric Jusuf is studious and thorough? Okay, I don't get the question fully, but what about Sam Gerrans? Is it Gerrans or Gerrans? It's Gerrans, isn't it?
I'm not sure, but either way, I would say that I'm not impressed.
Okay.
He has his own translation of the Quran, and he's very much, first of all, Mufti, with all respect, you mentioned it in your last video about the flat earth. What do you think about people who believe in the flat earth?
I actually think it's as dumb as it gets, if I'm going to be honest.
I know. It's funny you mentioned that, I think, in your last live. And the guy believes in a flat earth conspiracy. He also believes in it.
Okay.
Yes.
For the record, I've messaged Sam Gerrans. He's probably going to watch this now and think, acha.
Hey Stan, what's going on?
Right, so I messaged him, I introduced myself, and I said that, look, I'd like to get you on because people have, after having Professor Edip on here, quite a few people messaged saying, why don't you get a different Quranist perspective from somebody like Sam Gerrans? So I didn't know who he was, so I Googled him and I saw his website and I found him on, I can't remember, I think Instagram. And I messaged him. So he did say to me he's going to check out my channel, he's going to check stuff out, and then he'll let me know. But yeah, so he's a flat earther. I didn't know he was a flat earther.
He's a flat earther. He's very much of the conspiratorial type of mindset. He also believes in a sort of global elitism, that the elites are against us and trying to keep us all down. And me personally, and I don't take you as that kind of person either, I'm not much into conspiracy. So even when I was into the Quran only stuff, I was never really into his material. Yeah. So that speaks volumes. Somebody has asked, what do you think of Dr. Shabir Ali's presentation of number 19? Now, I will just say, before letting you take that away, I will just say I have messaged Dr. Shabir Ali. I did ask him, this was recently, that because I saw some videos of him with the number 19 on YouTube. I did ask him, so I messaged him just in the last few weeks, saying that, Sheikh, out of curiosity, is this something you're still very passionate about? The video is a good few years old, so it could be that you've moved on. He did say to me in his response, but I don't want to, I'm just summing it up, so I could be, it wasn't his exact words, but he said that he is still with it, but it's not, I got the impression he's not with it the way like Professor Edip is with it, but he does see some wonder to it. And he said he would be happy to discuss it on my show as he frees up from his preoccupations. But yep. Take it away, Jake, man. Yeah, I've seen his presentation on it. Also, I don't know if you know, but Ahmed Deedat, back in the day, he's one of the first people that supported this so-called miracle of 19. And I think Dr. Shabir picked it up from there somewhere along the way. And what I would say is I would offer the same criticisms that I just did about 19 to Dr. Shabir, and I'd like to hear his responses to those things. I've never communicated with him on it, so I don't know how he would answer those things. But
I would assume, and this is just an assumption on my part, but I would assume that Dr. Shabir Ali would be more kind of like balanced towards this whole topic. Like he would... I don't think to him it's a matter of dogma. I'm assuming by how I've known him as a very kind of like a reason-based person, not so caught up in dogma. But I mean, Allahu A'lam. Somebody's asked a question here that, what is your... right, it's moving. Joseph, a.k.a. Quran-centric. What is...
I know that guy. I know him.
I've never heard of this guy.
Yeah,
who is he?
I've communicated with him before. I know him. Somebody asked, what is my opinion on him?
Yeah, so what do you think of... Yeah, what do you think of?
So he's also popular. Let me tell you something. This guy, I had communications with him because he's out in California. When I started speaking to this guy, I had to straighten him out on a few things.
All right.
And this is actually a perfect time to introduce this topic. Broadly speaking, in the Quran-only movement, you have two broad camps that I've classified as. You have the ritualists and the non-ritualists. The ritualists are the ones who believe in Salah, Hajj, Siyam, and in the same sort of traditional understanding as a Sunni would. You have the non-ritualist camp who says, no, all of those things are not what you think they mean. Salah is not actually a ritual prayer. Siyam is not actually...
It's like what, like a state of mind or something? Is that what?
Yeah, and did you see when you had the discussion with Professor Edip, he insinuated that, but he said that's the bigger picture of what it's mainly about. But he said there is this ritualistic aspect of Salah. They go a step further to say that's the only aspect. There is no ritualistic aspect whatsoever. You see? So there's a split in the
So,
Quran.
so this Joseph, Quran-centric person, he's with non-ritualist, is he?
Yes, which I'm getting ready to tell you.
Oh, right, okay.
That I used to be in Edith Yücel's camp. Then, here's what their main problem is, Mufti. They believe that the Quran is fully detailed. That it is, it's fully detailed. So, the conundrum that they're in is, if it's fully detailed, which you hinted at before, where are the details for these rituals in the Quran? They are not there. There are some minor details, but all details from A to Z are not there. We know that. So because of that, they only have two options. They either have to reinterpret those words radically to mean something else to get rid of the rituals, or they have to do what Edith Yücel tries to do, and that is to cobble up some minor details in the Quran and say, here's the Salah. But then if you poke and prod, you say, ask one simple question. Where does the Quran tell you how to begin the prayer? To raise your hands and say Allahu Akbar. It's not there. Where does the Quran tell you how to end the prayer? It's not there. In fact, Edith Yücel uses a verse in chapter 10, verse 10, to justify how he ends the prayer, which is, I believe, let me just read it out here. I believe it's...
You've been stalking Edith.
Listen,
you know everything that he says. I like it.
People have to know I was heavy into this stuff, man. Heavy. I was heavy.
And just to justify to the people as well that this is not, that's actually the reason behind this passion that Jake is coming forth with, that when he embarked into Islam, when he became Muslim, this is all he knew for the majority of his life as a Muslim. That's why, you feel there's this passion to kind of get it, because some people may be thinking, what's going on here? Why are you constantly? So there's a backdrop to that.
Yeah, and I'm trying to match Professor Edip's intensity.
He's a very passionate person as well. I have to say.
Yeah, he knows where I'm coming from. So in chapter 10, verse 10, it says, their prayer in it is glory be to our God, and their greeting in it is peace. And the end of their prayer is praise be to God, the Lord of the Word.
وما كان صلاتهم عند البيت إلا مكاء وتصدية.
No.
Yeah. That was me trying to show off.
No. What I'm going to show you is that you got confused because why? The word that he's translating as prayer is dua, not salah.
Salatuhum in the bayt. Oh, not that verse.
This is a different verse.
Oh, right, okay.
The point that I was going to make is he's grasping.
There's a reason why I got confused.
Yeah.
Don't lose faith in me, people.
He's using this verse to say that this is how we end the salah, but the word salah is not even in the verse. And so how he ends his prayer is by saying, praise be to God, the Lord of the worlds. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. But this is totally different. And in fact, the word salah is not in the verse. So my point is that when you go down the route of saying that salah is actually a ritual prayer, or at least in certain aspect of it is ritualistic, then you have the burden from a Quran-only perspective of showing all the details of your prayer in the Quran. And you can't do so you wind up with these kind of problems. Now, in regards to Joseph, bring it back to the question. When I first met Joseph online, he was of this mindset, and I showed him the problem. I said, look, bro, if you want to be Quran only and you say it's fully detailed, where are the details for the prayer that you're doing? He eventually said, well, I can't find them. So he switched his position to a non-ritualistic camp, and now he's in that. Now, the refutation of these people is that, which Edith said, and I can give several verses, that clearly show that at least some aspects of Salah are ritualistic, that some aspects of Hajj are ritualistic, Siyam, and so on. So their problem is that they have to radically reinterpret these terms, that things become unknowable in a sense. Because, for example, I have one person who I'm discussing this Masjid al-Haram stuff with. I asked him, what is Masjid al-Haram? And this is going back to our point. From a purely Quranic perspective, unless you resort to something outside, you can't answer that question. There's no details as to what it is. So
no, shukran. Henna saying that's what you get for showboating, Mufti. That's what I get. This is the story of my life. Right, so, oh my days. Can you show the salah? You just want it to be something more than it is. You think about, I think that's just a statement, not a question.
Yeah.
Simone, is it Simone or Simon? It's Simon, but with an E, Simone. I think Simone's very passionate, has been writing a lot. I take it coming from the Quranist background.
We angered a few people.
I think you've, you're going to get some stalkers after this as well. I'm telling you.
I'll just send them your way if they get out of hand.
They're always welcome here. There's anybody can join this caravan. Mufti G Wagwan. Well, we're taking Q&A. That's what's going down. Lasagna is great. Alex, you're doing it. He said he recognized the name was Italian. He said that earlier on. And Fred, shukran for your support. You're doing it. Right, Jake. Are there diverse views of Prophet's role, status in Quran-only movements?
Okay. Yeah, there is a difference of opinion. What I want to say is some people may come from the angle of what you're saying in epistemological sense, not in the full-on sense that they believe that the messenger himself was an independent legislator, but they would say, like Edith Yüksel would say, because he was a leader and a sort of ruler at that time, that if he were to give a command in battle or a general command to the people, that would be adhered to, but it would have a qualitative difference between that and an actual dini matter.
So they would just say it's kind of like and it's just basically the Prophet being a person and telling somebody, it's not religious kind of commandments.
And they would put maybe more stock in it because it was the Prophet himself, but they wouldn't view it in the same way that it was the Quran.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Right, cool. What's going on? Claire said she's so that's Simone. It must be a she then. I was thinking, is it Simon or is it Simone? But alright, so we've got some locas saying she's a nutcase. Everybody's welcome, people. Everybody's welcome. Nazam, Quranist is offensive. No, Nazia. Quranist is offensive as it's a sect name. Sunnis give to those who read the Quran on its own. We are Muslims, simple. Sure. I said to Professor Edip as well when we were discussing on my show that look, at the end of the day, it's not. I don't feel in Islam God has truly given us Muslims the right or the kind of license to say who is not Muslim and who is not. We do this as say by we, not me, but I'm saying we as Muslims do this. But I think it's not really something that Islam came about. I would say that, look, this is my understanding. I can define that, look, this is what mainstream, or this is what generally, for the most part, Muslims believe. Somebody could come along and say, I don't believe that. Fine. I mean, to me, I'm not gonna call that person a kafir. I'm just gonna say, well, okay, this person believes this. But for the sake of discussion here, we are using labels in saying like, a Shi'i person is saying this, a Sunni, a Hanbali, a Maliki, a Deobandi, a Salafi. It's not about sectarianism. I'm against sectarianism. It's just for the sake of dialogue, that's all.
Right. We're just trying to make it clear who we're talking about. I don't mean it in any pejorative way.
Nazia says Jake is a hypocrite. Ooh.
Yeah, I know her.
Do you know Nazia? You nutty.
She doesn't like me too much. But
come on, Nazia, why don't you like Jake? Look, come on, he's a likable guy, man.
Oh man.
Send
Yeah.
send some of those cute emojis on here. Come on, spread the love, man, Nazia.
But what I would say in response to that, with all respect, as I said in the beginning of the conversation, it's presented as if the Quranists, or Muslims, but referring to the people who who adhere to the Quran only, as they're so like hippie-ish, but yet they're calling everybody else in the tradition mushrikeen. Yeah, so it's a little bit offensive to me to sit up here and say, well, you called me a Quranist when you're calling me a mushrik, for God's sake.
I see. This is it runs deep, people. It runs deep. So guys, your questions, feel free to post
Mufti,
them.
can I? Since I've been answering questions, can I ask you a question?
Of course you can. Yeah.
Now, how we distinguish between the ontological versus epistemological rejection, the other angle that I would criticize the people who follow only the Quran would be, from a historical perspective, are you aware of any groups in the past that rejected the notion of the Sunnah from an ontological perspective? Now, I know that there have been some that took an epistemological twist on it, that said maybe, hey, there's some doubt in this and in that aspect. But from an ontological perspective, have there been groups prior to this recent Quran-only phenomenon that rejected them, the Sunnah?
That's a very interesting question, Jake.
Because I'm not aware of any, and I would argue that with all the sectarianism that we've had between the Sunnis, the Shias, the Kharijis, all of these different sects, they all united on the Sunnah. Now, they may have had a different understanding of it, but they all agreed with the ontological concept of the Sunnah. And to me, that is problematic for them to provide precedent.
I think there's some, from my understanding, there's some kind of proto argument points that may be scattered amongst diverse people that are not obviously, let's say, holding this particular. So you've got this Quranist theory that we've spoken of, this ontological perspective of saying the Prophet does not bring, he does not have a license to bring anything to Islam. It is only the Quran. This position may have some traces in, I'm speaking about within the broader Sunni tradition even. So this, but it's not the same thing. I'm just showing you some fossil traces that may be some slightly overlapping. So there is a discussion on, can the Prophet Halin Nabi Sharia, or is Tashri' only for Allah exclusively? So you see in the Usul al-Fiqh books like Jamal Jawami' and other books, they discuss this, that Halin Nabi Haq and Yushari', that can the Nabi himself, like the Sunnis agree that there is more legislation than what is in the Quran. So they agree that there is a Sunnah. The difference is the ontological nature of the Sunnah. They feel that some Sunnis, there's a split amongst them. So some feel that Sunnah is also kind of divinely inspired. So the Prophet, so for example, let's say the Hajj or these other things, the Salah, the Prophet saying, say Subhan Rabbiyal Azim, or do this, do that. This is divinely, in huwa illa wahyun yuha, that this is coming to the Prophet intuitively, but divinely inspired. Others, like some of the Malikis, and there's been others as well, they have argued that the Prophet could, just like ijtihadan, just make a decision. And some have gone to the extent, so in Jamal Jawami, they will argue that there's a position that that the Nabi, whatever he says, yakun huwa sawab. So that there are ta'addutul haqq, that there is this multiplicity of truths, of objective truths. And whatever the Prophet commands, like let's say arbitrarily, like let's say the Prophet was to say, like they asked the Prophet, can we do this? He says yes. That is now going to become identified as al-haq, the truth. But it's arbitrary. So for example, they use the hadith that the Prophet is asked when he's talking about Hajj, and he says, one of the companions says, Afi kulli amin ya Rasulullah, is it every year that we do Hajj? And the Prophet says to him, Law qultu na'am la wajabat. If I was to say yes, it would have then become obligatory. So I am in line with that view as well, that the Prophet did have the license to legislate. But there is a split within Sunni Islam. They all agree that there is more than just, there is the Sunnah in addition to the Quran. They disagree on the nature of where the Sunnah is coming from. Is it just coming from part of it? Is it just coming from the Prophet saying it because it makes sense to him? So when Abbas asks, when the Prophet is saying, don't do this for the haram, you're not allowed to uproot plants, you're not allowed to cut trees, you're not allowed to, and then Abbas says, illa al-arak ya Rasulullah, this particular kind of plant, we need that plant. And the Prophet says, okay, accept that one. So he's making, it's in real time, he's interacting and changing it. So I don't know if they tap into, these Quranists tap into some of that discourse. If they do, fine.
Yeah, but I would say in either way, they couldn't tap into it. Why? Because both positions, although they disagree about whether it is revelation, divine revelation from Allah, or it is the messenger himself arbitrarily making things up, they both agree that the result of either one of those things becomes an authority in the deen. And the Quranist is rejecting that notion. They're saying that the only thing he has authority in is Quran.
No, I agree with you that I'm not saying I'm just trying to find some markers, identifiable markers in our heritage, just trying to think. There have been some philosophers who have deemed they've kind of, if I can use the word, maybe downplayed the status of prophets. Like they've still said prophets were amazing people, but they've kind of said that they felt, maybe there's been some who felt that it's basically anybody that reached such a maqam could have become then chosen by God. And they didn't see them. But this argument, I don't see it like that in our history. I could be wrong, could be my limited reading, but I don't see it like that. Yeah.
Now, I mean, just referencing quickly back to the Qibla incident. Now, with those
people are going to say, what is this fixation on the Qibla? That's because the Qibla is fixed.
with those two options that you mentioned, the Quranists can't use either one of those.
Yeah.
He either has to say it was arbitrary that the messenger did it, in which case, why would it be being mentioned in the Quran, or that it was Wahi from Allah. In either case, it clashes with his assertion that the only thing he was authoritative in was the Quran, because the question comes, then how in the world did he know what the Qibla was if he was restricted to the Quran? And
I totally agree with you on that, and I think that Nazia has said, one of your very keen followers, Jake.
Much love.
Much love. Nazia, I can't see the full name there. I'll have to. Nazia Shah. Nazia Shah.
Yeah.
She has mentioned, Nazia, you're doing it. A lot of passion here. She said, Jake, I've been wanting your lying backside. But I can't put a stop there, full stop. Let me finish the sentence. Because that offer might just be immediately taken up by Jake. He might just go, oh, okay. Here it is. I'll send you my number. It says, your lying backside on a platform. So make sure you give me a time and a date, and I will organize a live debate for us to talk about your misguiding backside.
Oh, ya salam.
Ya salam.
Wow.
Oof. Nazia G. You've gone in deep there. There seems to be a lot of passion pouring out there.
Don't worry.
You're doing it, Nazia. You're doing it. That's what I'd say. Right, so people, I could see, quite a few people I think have been following you, Jake, for a little while here.
I told you, I was heavy into this. Listen, the Quran alone community, they know me.
Do they? Okay, wow.
They know.
Wow, this is it, man. I didn't realize how you're like I don't think a legend is the right word amongst them, but you're probably Satan incarnate amongst them. But you've got here Alejandro Soleiman is saying, Mufti, I knew Jake from high school. Shout me out, man. There you go, Alejandro.
Oh, Alejandro.
All right. Orale, ¿qué tal?
He is still my friend to this day, and he's the one who originally introduced me to Islam. So props.
Wow. Alejandro, you're doing it, man.
He's been on this journey. He's been on this journey with me. I converted him from a Sunni to Quran alone, and then deconverted him back to being Sunni.
Alejandro, you're doing it, man. You're doing it.
Right. Awesome.
Somebody, right. So, Jake, about his views on the Hadith, on Umar fighting Abu Huraira for changing Hadith, and what's his problems with Ali Da'wah. Okay, so there's two questions there. One is if you know of the hadith of Umar criticizing Abu Huraira, if you have an opinion on that, and two, if you have I don't know if you've been vocal on Ali Da'wah.
No, I don't know what that's about.
Okay,
I never mentioned him at all. I never met the guy. I never spoke to him.
Okay, so that part is obviously.
I don't know where that came from, but in regards to the hadith, I'm not sure what the context of that is. Maybe, do you know exactly what the questioner is talking about?
The hadith, yes, I mean there is a hadith which speaks about, there's quite a few descriptions where Umar radiallahu anh criticized Abu Huraira for his excessive hadith narrations, and I kind of agree with that sentiment. I do feel that in that culture of excess transmission, it's inevitable, whether from the transmitter or the recipient, mistakes become inevitable, and what you do is these things, there's a great likelihood of false narrative proliferation to take place, because if you're constantly just sitting down saying he said this, he said this, he said this, he said this, if you hear 50 things from me today, there's a great likelihood that you might go away, maybe even with 3 of them, 5 of them, mixing them up with other things I've said, or from other people. So I do feel that sentiment is true. There's truth to it. Ray Stalin, you're doing it, man. Much love for the super chat. This is a straw man fallacy. Giving the Quran sole authority does not mean one is unable to then use linguistics, history, and yes, hadith as needed. The key difference is not giving equal religious authority to both sources.
But that's foolishness, because that's the Sunni opinion.
Because Ray Stalin, I totally agree with you, and that is my view. That is, I would feel, for the most part, the view of the Salaf of this Ummah, people like Imam Malik, other people. They bring Sahih Hadith in the Muwatta. Imam Malik then says, by the way, we don't accept this Hadith. Here it is with the golden chain, but still, we're not accepting it. It's going against the Quran. It's going against this. So I totally agree with what you're saying, Raislin. It makes a valid point.
I mean, both of us, I don't think neither of us are saying that the Hadith is somehow equal or above the Quran.
In fact, that has been my very problem with the status of Bukhari, why I did Bukhari Gate. I explained in the intro, it's because I say Bukhari are 3 things that, to me, Bukhari is one, the Imam, who I respect and admire for his great contribution and efforts in Islam. 2 is the book, and 3 is this myth and legend that has emerged, this kind of entity which now Islam has become Bukhari centric. So this was my entire problem with it, and I totally agree with you. Right, me and somebody said views on LSD. All right. You're doing it, man. You're doing it. So, right. I don't know if you do you speak on LSD, is it? Or is that just a random question?
That's above my pay grade.
Is
I am
it?
not a faqih at all.
Uh-huh. Right. So, why is the chat slowed?
I've heard your responses to that, which I'm sure they're aware of.
My responses are that these are an issue of legality, but I feel that beyond that, I don't feel that Islam is at odds or at loggerheads with things like psychedelics. In fact, they can help, if done properly, to explore a deeper dimension. But guys,
I just want to make it clear for the viewers, I am not a scholar at all. I am just somebody who has been involved with the Quran only movement for 7 years. I obviously dedicated a lot of time to it.
I mean, you are an Islamic academic. I mean, let's you know.
I'm somebody who has experience with their arguments, the ins and outs of it. I have all the verses memorized that they use. And that's why I'm here to offer an alternative perspective to what Professor Edip and the other Quran-only people have presented. That's all.
Right. Yep. Somebody has asked why hasn't he challenged Professor Edip. Jake has extended a friendly invitation, and it may even be taken up, and it may even take place on Mindtrap, people. We may have both of our presenters. The only thing is I don't want it to turn into like a and then hands go across the screens and then
no, not at all. I mean, what I'll just say for clarification, since Mufti has contact with Edip, and I also do, we both know him. I have no problem coming on here on a different session and having Mufti as a moderator. Maybe he can ask some prodding questions to both of us and have us respond and have some exchanges and keep it academic and cordial. I have no problem with that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I will extend. You have already extended it to Professor Edip. I will extend it to him. I'm happy to do that. The only thing is like that. I obviously do respect. People know I do respect Professor Edip. I have a very and I see him as somebody who's dedicated a huge portion of his life to Islam, even if it's different to my understanding. And he's very passionate about what he does, and he's senior to me in age. And in fact, after the last show, he was even saying to me, he said, Mufti, I felt that I was just I was being a bit too abrupt with you, and I was being a bit too harsh with some of the things. You should have kind of set me straight. And I said to him that no, it's not my style. And two, out of respect for you as a for your age and things like this, I wouldn't do that. But so I'm happy to facilitate that if it takes place. Let's see.
Inshallah.
Somebody has asked. The thoughts on what is the meaning of Ya'juj and Ma'juj. I don't know if you've had any theories on things like that. Have you done stuff?
No, I haven't researched yet. I don't have anything to offer as far as that goes.
Right, so why don't you challenge Christian Prince Jake Brancatella?
Christian Prince, I mean, that guy is, I'm sorry to say, he's a joker.
Yeah.
He's very manipulative. He misquotes the Quran, Hadith. I don't take him seriously, and I feel bad for anyone who does.
Because I've been asked this as well, that look, Mufti, can you speak to Christian Prince? Now, I initially didn't know who he was. I did check out some of his things on YouTube. He had some kind of recorded sessions. Now, you see, somebody like that is just, like, in my impression, I could be wrong, but my impression of the few clips that I saw of him speaking to other people was he wasn't really interested in a dialogue, and it was just like, I'm just out to bash Muslims and Islam, and I don't care what you have to say because it doesn't really matter. You can say it no, and it is this way. And so I didn't really value that kind of a discourse. So this is why I've not engaged Christian prince, I don't really see of much value to engage him, because I don't see him as, from what I've seen, unless he is different in other places, him being dialogical. That's been a huge part. I've seen him more as he just wants, like, he's just passionately confrontational. So maybe people who are equally like that on the Muslim side, like people like, I see Muhammad Hijab, for example, I see him very passionately confrontational. I see him as more knowledgeable than people like, somebody had asked about Ali Dawa. But even Ali Dawa, I see him as a very passionately confrontational on the Muslim side towards their kind of opponents. Maybe people like that would serve as a much equal kind of a match for that kind of entertainment.
Yeah, they did go at it. But
did they? Okay, I don't even know that.
They had a conversation, if you could call it that. And with respect to Muhammad Hijab, I mean, I can see what you're saying about him, but I wouldn't put them on the same level in the sense.
No, I wouldn't, because to me, Muhammad Hijab is. He's not an Islamic kind of like a sheikh, alim, whatever, but he's very knowledgeable. He's not like, and he's very articulate. He will listen to the other person. He's not like, I've watched some of his things, but I feel that his approach is like, he himself in one of his clips says, look, when I go against certain people who are against Islam, I on purpose will be very aggressive in my thing to them. So that's what I was just not on his Christian prince. I don't even see him as intelligent like that. I don't see him as an intellectual, whereas I would see Muhammad Hijab as an intellectual, although I would disagree with him massively on things.
Now Mufti, have you seen some of Christian Prince's videos of some of the filthy and disgusting things he said?
So the things I've seen is just on YouTube where he's doing all this. This is what I'm saying. It's just, it's not like...
I mean, I'll just give an example because some of the viewers might not know them. And this is unrestricted. So, for example, he brings people on his live. Random people call in. He brings them on. And then he just beats them down. This one poor girl called up. And she had to be about 16 years old or something. I don't know. But she was a young girl. And she calls up and he's questioning her about a hadith that has to do with breastfeeding or something like that. And he starts saying to the girl, oh, you know what? Are you going to give me your breasts so I can get milk? And all this kind of filthy, crazy stuff.
This is the kind of stuff like this that I saw when I checked him out on YouTube. I saw somebody who was just very offensive, but his only purpose was to be offensive, and it wasn't. He wasn't an intellectual. It wasn't. You see, I don't even mind being offended, but I want like proper intelligence. Like I want somebody with like intellectual to discuss with. I just saw somebody just very angry and hateful of Muslims, and I can't be bothered with something like that. I've even seen other people who are sometimes, they might be ex-Muslims, for example, but they're still, like, I've been asked, why do you speak to such and such? And I've seen that so for example, I was asked, there's somebody, I don't know if you've come across him, he may be more UK, his name's Ace, and I've had some exchanges with him on Instagram, pleasant exchanges. I've messaged him.
And he's what? He's an ex-Muslim?
He's an ex-Muslim, yeah. But so I initially saw, like, he used to, I don't know if he still does it, if he's very active, but somebody had sent me a lot of his Insta stories where he's very, the Prophet is a paedophile, the Prophet had sex with a little kid, what's wrong with you people, how can you, this is like this and this. So somebody asked me, Mufti, can you reach out to him? And he, as a person, put views aside, as a person, comes across as somebody like a cool person, like some things that I saw. It comes across as a decent kind of like somebody who's very streetwise and, is clued up with what's going on and intelligent as well. He doesn't come across as dumb. So I did message him and I said to him, look, this is, and I just, from the kind of humanity side of things, I just said to him that, look, if there are any questions, you can always reach out to me. But I told him, look, ignore the hate as well, because he does I could see a lot of Muslims were like, oh, you need to be killed, you need to be this, and this just makes it even worse then. because he's obviously getting really wound up. Now, I saw recently he came on a podcast with Vidu Vids, and I did watch that, but I could still see he was still hurting. And, because he said things like, look, Arabic is just a donkey's language, and these are just donkeys, and these are... And when I was asked, why don't you get him on your show, I did say that, look, I will, but I feel he still needs to heal, that he's hurting. That I feel sometimes some people are hurting so much that let that heal with time. And it will heal. Like, I've spoken to other ex-Muslims who, they went through a phase where they were really they're hateful towards Islam. But then it subsides, and then they start thinking more, it becomes less emotional and more rational. And that's a good time to talk to people, I feel.
Right.
Yeah, so, I mean, the same thing, I mean, even though I don't think Christian Prince, was he an ex-Muslim by any chance? He wasn't an ex-Muslim, was he?
I don't think so. I'm not sure, but I don't think so.
Sure, yeah. So that's but
I'm saying
so I wouldn't, these kind of people, I wouldn't really give them the time of day like Christian Prince, because, or anybody that just comes on and he's just about, the Prophet is a this, the Prophet is a blah, 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 blah. I don't, it's not, I don't want to engage that person.
For me, even worse than that, criticizing the religion is one thing, but making it personal with people who call on like this girl. I mean, there's one thing to say, oh, the Prophet was whatever you want to say he was, but saying it to the girl and trying to say these things, I mean, to me, is just disgusting.
Yeah. No,
it's on a
absolutely. You're right. Actually, now that you said it, I do remember some video. I don't know who was. He may have actually been. It may be that video with Ali Dawah. Actually, yes, I think I did see that. I forgot all about it. And there seems to be where he calls into, I think, Ali Dawah or Muhammad. I don't know if Muhammad Hijab was there, but their show. And he does mention a lot of this stuff about, they gave and he says about their boobs, they gave their boobs to the Prophet's wives gave their boobs. Will your mothers give their boobs to? And he starts personally insulting. Yeah, I actually do recall that.
That's what he did to the girl who called and I said, oh, will you give me your boobs? If I tell you this, will you give me your boobs? And I'm like, really, man, you have some screwed up minds.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, so any other questions, people? We've is he a professor? 19, he is a professor. I don't know whether that's a question to you or is it to somebody else. I think you're training to someday become a professor.
Yes, inshallah.
So in the future.
I'm doing some research. Actually, speaking of Christian Prince, I'm doing some research on the Christian doctrine of the incarnation. I'm working on a PhD on it. And so inshallah, when I complete that, I hope to be a professor in philosophy. Cool.
Right, so people, we're going to have to start wrapping this up. I know we've taken up so much of Jake's time as well, and this has been going on for quite a while. Are there any if there's any rapid round questions, we can throw them at Jake, who's on fire right now. He's doing it, he's in his element. Right, so, I mean, Jake, as a quick question, just intrigued, you as a person, putting this aside, I mean, you're in New Jersey, I mean, how, your relationship generally with other imams or other things, or the Muslim community, tell us just a bit about it. How is that going?
Yeah, it's good now since I became Sunni. I'm attending the local mosque. I used to not attend Masjid before for these reasons. And I'm studying Maliki fiqh with Dr. Shadi al-Masri.
All right. Doing it, man. You're doing it. That's it. School of Medina. You should ask Dr. Shadi al-Masri if he'd come on to Mindtrap.
I'll put it
I have had differences with Dr. Shadi al-Masri, but if he does come on, it will be very respectful. It will be very. I would never, any guests I bring on, I would never be rude to any guests. It's not who I am. So if he does, if he's willing.
Yeah, I actually appeared on his podcast to have a
Right.
similar discussion about the Quranists and 19 and all that stuff. So,
and his
people can
podcast is called Safina.
Safina Society, yeah. So
Safina Society. Look, so Dr. Shadi's podcast, people check it out. See, giving him a shout out right there, plug right there. Dr. Shadi, it's all love. Mwah.
Yeah.
Habibi,
Yeah,
come on.
you can check it out. Yeah.
Yeah.
But Mufti, if I could trouble you just to give one more verse on this.
Go
topic.
for it, man, Jake. Trouble me, man.
Yeah.
Trouble me.
Yeah. So with the same phenomenon that I spoke about with the Qibla, in chapter 66, verse 3, and I'm reading from Edith Yüksel's translation, it says, when the Prophet disclosed a hadith to some of his wives, then one of them spread it, and God revealed it to him. He recognized part of it and denied part. So when he informed her, she said, and this is the key part, who informed you of this? He said, I was informed by the knowledgeable, the ever aware. So this is a clear example of where the messenger was given information from Allah that is not part of the Quran, but is referenced in the Quran itself.
Yeah, no, that is a very good point, actually.
So people may have been confused a little bit with the Qibla, but this is a more hopefully.
That's a very good point, actually. You're doing it, Jake, man. You're in your element today. This is Raceling. You're doing it with the support, man. You know what, Raceling, we're gonna have to. I take it you're in another country. We're gonna have to at some point fly you in. You know what, you're doing it. Are some of these movements a result of traditional Islam's unwillingness or inability to meet modern challenges? That is a very valuable question.
Yeah, I would say, like I mentioned in the beginning, when I first came across this, taking the Hadithi example, is, you know, the sort of Salafi dawah in the UK and the US is so prominent that I was unaware of the possibility of even rejecting a single hadith in Bukhari. Then I started studying more, came across some of your videos and other people, started studying Maliki fiqh, and I realized that Imam Malik himself did not accept several hadith in Bukhari. And you've given the example before about the dog licking the bowl and cleaning it 9 times and all of that. So I think that it is due to a lot of ignorance, and I don't mean that in a bad way. The laymen are not aware of this other perspective.
I would feel that there's been a systematic kind of cover-up of this approach.
I was going to say that
are we in sync here?
Yeah, we are. Yeah, we got that strong Wi-Fi going on. But what I would say is, in one sense, the laymen have to do the work to go and seek out these diverse opinions. On the other side, the scholars have to stop hiding this and present it as this is what Islam is, and you have to accept every single hadith in Bukhari, and if you don't, you're a deviant or a kafir. We have to get rid of this kind of presentation.
No, I agree with you, absolutely. I feel that sometimes so much of Islam suffers not because of the challenges external, but because of the stubborn nature of those who profess it. Which is, you know, on many occasions, not always, but on many occasions, some of the clergy. I was going to make a comment here. I didn't delete the comment, but there was a comment here by somebody called Quran Alone Muslim. Now he said, and I didn't delete this on purpose because I just thought, look, I'd rather make a comment on it. He said, look, the school of Zindiq Imam Malik who promoted shirk. But, you know, I just wanted to say that, look, in all honesty, if you know, you can say anything about Imam Malik, you can say anything about anybody. I'm not going to get all, you know, we're not going to get like, you know, we're not like 10 years old and you're insulting my dad. Yeah. It's not. But in all honesty, is this kind of behavior how you expect your argument to be won? By just like insulting let's say, symbols of within a particular orthodoxy to say, well, I know, you're wrong, so you're this mushrik imam who just promoted zindiq, kafir imam. Even though Imam Malik wasn't perfect, or nobody was perfect in that sense beyond. So, but I wanted to point that out rather than delete that in saying, look, this kind of hatred is not the message of Islam. I've even said, like when I spoke to Professor Edip, that look, despite us disagreeing so much, I wouldn't call you I wouldn't even say, I actually said it's not my job to say who is a deviant. I'm just, because people would say I'm a deviant. It's my job in just saying that, look, this is what, let's say, so many Muslims follow. This is what this school believes. This is what main Muslims today, for the most part, seem to follow, and that is your view. So I'm not, see, to me, you're not a kafir. To me, I'm not here. It's not about me trying to call you a deviant. You're just different. That's all. Cool.
Yeah, but now, I mean, that comment accurately depicts what I described.
Yeah, it does actually, because
they actually do believe that anyone
and
who follows the Sunnah is a mushrik.
And I want to say that because Quran alone Muslim, this is to you. When this dialogue began, I said to Jake that I think you're misreading the hyperbole that they just write in their books, that they don't, surely they don't really believe that, but you actually said, no, they do believe, this is by my experience, and you have just affirmed for us in real time that that's actually real, that was, what, I was just thinking, I was just giving you the benefit of the doubt.
And the sister who commented before, Nazia, I mean, she is famous for going on Facebook and saying all these kind of things. Filthy
is she?
Stuff,
oh,
caffeine,
filthy stuff.
Kind of things.
Nazia,
so,
you naughty.
and I'm saying how they present themselves as being open-minded and all these kind of things, but they're like on the far. You have the far right and you have the far left, and to me, they're both. Sorry to say, head cases.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, somebody said, is Jake a Quranist? No, he's not. But he had been for many years, and this whole video, for God's sake, was about explaining why Quranists are wrong. So this whole thing, the whole dialogue was pretty much covered up by that. Somebody saying, I thought Safina was going to be a hot chick.
Man.
I'm sure Dr. Shadi al-Masri is kind of hot in his own way. If you go on there and you're like, where's Safina? Where's Safina? And you're like, mashallah. Yeah, right. So, cool people. Right, so, guys, right, you know what? Let's wrap this up, people. Right, Jake, if people want to reach out to you, where some people have been making comments that you don't seem to be too active on social media, so I don't know whether that is the case or it's just because of COVID. Where can people reach out to you?
On Facebook. I don't actually have an Instagram. I do have a Twitter, but I'm not really active on it. They can reach out to me on Facebook, Jake Brancatella, just as it's spelled on the screen. And also I have a YouTube channel called The Criterion. That's THE Criterion. And
you okay for me to share it in the description, or do you,
yeah, I'll send you the link and you can share it in the description, so people can contact me there or on Facebook.
Guys, there you go. That's what we're talking about. You can reach out, and I can say that Jake is definitely active on Facebook Messenger. He's very quick at responding, so if you want to reach out to him, do that. Other than that, people, at the end of the day, the whole purpose of this is to get discussions going, get dialogues moving. We did have Professor Edip on here, presented a view. We've had other people present other views. I'm happy to, if there's certain recommendations, people want to recommend people, do message me. I will chase it up, inshallah, and I'll try to, so long as they are interesting and interested. So do check that they are interested as well. Cool, guys. Other than that, I will say that this right here today, shukran, once again, a big thank you to Jake, who's taken his time out, come on, line with us, given us his thoughts, his theories, his kind of refutation of the Quran alone movement. Damas y caballeros, the man, the myth, the legend, Jake. Right, shukran once again. And people, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala. I'm going to put out my page, my exit page as always. Do like. For God's sake, if you haven't already liked my, you know what, then we're going to make a collective dua against you. Do subscribe. But people, take very good care of yourselves. Once again, ma'as salama. Right, fi amanillah. Wassalamu alaikum.